In the dim glow of a nearly empty supermarket, a worn-out father stood at the checkout counter clutching a small pack of diapers. The only thing he could afford with his last crumpled dollar. His tired eyes betrayed both love and defeat, knowing his baby's needs were greater than his pockets could ever provide. Just as the cashier reached for the diapers, a voice from behind shattered the silence, calm, firm, and carrying the weight of authority. It said, "I'll take them all." The man turned to see a sharply dressed stranger, a figure who seemed to belong to a world far beyond his own struggles. What neither of them knew in that fragile moment was that this single act of kindness would unravel a story of pain, redemption, and an unexpected bond between two broken souls, the struggling father and the lonely CEO who had more wealth than anyone could imagine, yet hungered for something money could never buy. The young father's hands trembled slightly as he clutched the single pack of diapers, the last item he could afford with what little remained in his wallet. His fingers brushed over the crumpled dollar bills, worn thin from being exchanged too many times, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. Each crease in that money told the story of survival, of stretching every cent, of days where he skipped meals so his baby could eat. He had learned to ignore his own hunger, his own exhaustion, and his own dreams, because the tiny heartbeat that had come into his life was the only thing that mattered now. He was a single father, not by choice, but by circumstance, and each day tested the strength of a man who never thought he could endure so much pain, and yet find so much love in such a small pair of eyes. He remembered the first time he held his baby, how fragile and beautiful she was, how her cries seemed to fill every corner of the sterile hospital room and every empty place inside his chest. He had promised then that he would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing everything. That promise had guided him through nights of broken sleep, through long shifts at low-paying jobs, through the embarrassment of asking for help and being turned away. It had carried him through the loneliness of standing in grocery aisles, calculating prices to the last cent, knowing that even a single mistake at the register could leave him without the essentials his child needed. He was a father determined to stand tall for his daughter. Yet each day chipped away at him, leaving him wondering how much longer he could keep up the fight. There were mornings when he woke up before dawn to feed her, staring at her innocent face as she slept afterward, completely unaware of the storm her father fought outside those walls. She was too young to know that her diapers had become a luxury, that formula was sometimes substituted with watered-down milk, that her father's tired smile masked the ache of a man barely hanging on. He often whispered apologies to her when she cried, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he wished he could give her more. He wished he could give her the kind of life where she never had to feel lack, where she never had to see her father's shoulders stoop under invisible burdens, where she could grow up in warmth instead of scarcity. Those thoughts haunted him, yet they also fueled him to keep pushing, to keep fighting one more day. Walking to the store that night had been a decision born out of necessity. He had counted and recounted the coins in his pocket, hoping they would be enough for at least a small pack of diapers. The last pack at home had already been stretched far beyond what was reasonable, and he hated himself for the rash on his baby's skin, a consequence of using the same diaper too long. He carried with him not only his last dollar, but also his last shred of pride, because to walk into a store with so little felt like admitting defeat. Still, he told himself that pride didn't matter. His daughter's needs outweighed everything else, and he could live with the shame of poverty, as long as she had what she required to be comfortable, even if it was just for tonight. As he stood at the checkout, waiting for the cashier to scan the diapers, his mind wandered to the life he once dreamed of, a life that seemed so far away now. He had once imagined a stable home, a career, a partner to share the struggles with. But dreams had a way of collapsing when reality came crashing in, and now his life revolved around survival. Every decision was about making it through today, and the future was something he could barely think about without feeling his chest tighten. Yet even in the darkness, there was light. His baby's laugh, the way her tiny fingers wrapped around his, the look of trust in her eyes when she gazed at him. Those were the things that reminded him why he kept going. She gave him purpose when the world gave him none. The exhaustion showed in his eyes, in the way he carried himself, In the way he tried to mask his struggle from the world. People often looked at him with judgment, assuming laziness or irresponsibility had brought him here. Never knowing the battles he fought behind closed doors. They didn't see the nights he spent working odd jobs, the mornings he walked miles to save on bus fare, the countless sacrifices he made in silence. They didn't see the nights he cried quietly so his daughter wouldn't sense his despair. To them, he was just another broke man in line at the grocery store, clutching a pack of diapers like it was treasure. But to him, that moment represented everything. The proof of his love, the depth of his sacrifice, and the fragile thread of hope he refused to let break. When the cashier reached for the diapers, he felt both relief and dread. Relief that he had managed to get this far, dread that this small victory was fleeting, that tomorrow would bring another struggle. He knew the diapers would only last a few days, and then he would be back at the same counter, back with empty pockets, back with the same gnawing uncertainty. But for now, this was enough. He told himself that he could rest tonight knowing his baby would be okay, even if just for a short while. That was the rhythm of his life, small wins, small mercies, stitched together to form a fragile existence. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet strength. The kind of strength that comes not from abundance but from love, from a father's determination to rise again and again no matter how many times life tried to break him. He didn't see himself as extraordinary. He saw himself as a man doing what any father would do. But what he couldn't see, what he couldn't know in that moment, was how this one desperate act, buying diapers with his last dollar, would ripple into something far greater. Because sometimes, the universe listens to silent prayers, and sometimes, in the most ordinary of places, miracles begin to unfold. The man in the tailored suit stood silently behind the father at the checkout, his eyes catching on the worn pack of diapers clutched tightly in desperate hands. He was a man who had everything, at least by the world's standards: powerful boardroom presence, a sprawling office overlooking the city skyline, a mansion that echoed with emptiness, and a bank account so full that he no longer needed to check balances. Yet, in that moment, watching the young father count out every last coin and crumpled bill, he felt something inside stir, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for years. It was a mix of recognition and ache, because though he lived in abundance, he knew the sting of loneliness more deeply than most. Money had given him the ability to control almost everything, yet it had never bought him peace. Never quieted the silence that lingered in the halls of his home, never healed the invisible wounds he carried like chains around his heart. He was known by the world as a CEO, a man who had built empires, a name that inspired respect and sometimes fear. People spoke about his decisiveness, his brilliance, his relentless pursuit of success. They envied his lifestyle, the cars, the suits, the luxury. But no one saw the nights he returned to an empty house, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and sat in silence while memories clawed at him. No one saw the photographs he kept hidden away in a drawer, images of a family he had once dreamed of building but lost before it ever truly began. His fortune had grown, but so had his emptiness, until success itself felt like a hollow crown resting on weary shoulders. He had learned to keep his mask in place, to smile for the cameras, to shake hands with confidence, while inside he was crumbling in ways no one would ever guess. The father in front of him, with his tired eyes and trembling hands, reminded him of a past he had long buried. There had been a time, years ago, when he too had stood in lines like this, when every dollar mattered, when he had fought tooth and nail to survive. He remembered the humiliation of not being able to provide for the people he loved, the shame of being judged, the weight of knowing the world saw him as insignificant. Back then, he had vowed to rise, to never feel that helpless again. And he had risen, beyond anything he once thought possible. But in his climb, he had lost pieces of himself. Compassion, connection, the softness of heart that had once defined him. Standing there now, behind a man who embodied everything he had once been, he felt the sting of realization. Wealth had made him powerful, but it had also made him painfully alone. The diapers struck him as more than just baby supplies. They were a symbol, a quiet declaration of love and sacrifice. This father was standing here, stripped of pride, stripped of luxury, stripped of everything but determination. That determination was something he recognized, something he had once possessed, and seeing it again reignited an ache in him. He had chased success for years, thinking it would fill the void. But it had only deepened. He had no one to buy diapers for, no one to come home to, no one who depended on him with innocent trust. His wealth sat in banks and investments, but it never filled the silence that crept into his life when the meetings ended, when the crowds dispersed, when he was left alone with his thoughts. The CEO had built walls around himself, high and impenetrable, to keep out betrayal, disappointment, and pain. People wanted him for his money, his power, his influence, but never for who he truly was. He had grown tired of shallow conversations, of relationships built on what he could give rather than who he was. He had grown tired of pretending that he didn't notice the emptiness eating at him. And now, standing behind this struggling father, he felt those walls tremble just a little, shaken by something so simple yet so profound. A man with nothing but love for his child had more richness in his heart than he had ever known, and that realization cut deep. The voice that slipped from his lips, "I'll take them all," was not rehearsed, not calculated, not spoken from the part of him that negotiated contracts and closed billion-dollar deals. It came from the buried part of his soul that still longed for connection, for meaning, for something real. In that moment, it wasn't about charity or pity, it was about bridging the gap between two men who were, in their own ways, broken. One was drowning in poverty, the other in loneliness, and for the briefest moment, their worlds collided in an act of humanity that transcended wealth or status. As the cashier and the father looked at him in stunned silence, the CEO felt a rush of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. He thought of the child those diapers were for, a child who would never know the weight of this night, but who would be comforted because of it. He thought of his own emptiness, of how money had given him everything yet left him with nothing to nurture, nothing to fight for beyond profit and prestige. He envied the father's struggles in a strange way, because those struggles were born out of love, and love was something he had lost along the way. His life had been defined by control, by the ability to bend situations to his will, but here was a man he could not dismiss or overlook. The quiet dignity in the father's struggle, the unspoken love that radiated from every choice he made, struck a chord in him. He realized that what he was witnessing wasn't weakness but strength, the kind of strength no fortune could buy. It humbled him, it shook him, and it made him confront the truth: success without connection was failure in disguise. As he insisted on buying not just that one pack of diapers, but all the diapers in the store, it was less about the money and more about the message. He wanted to tell this father, without saying the words aloud, that he saw him, that his struggle mattered, that his sacrifices were not invisible. And in doing so, he also hoped to remind himself that he was still human, still capable of feeling, still capable of giving in a way that wasn't transactional but heartfelt. For the first time in a long time, he felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose flicker faintly, fragile but real. He knew that when he walked out of that store, he would still return to his empty mansion, to his lonely routines, to the echoing silence that haunted him. But maybe, just maybe, this act would be the start of something different. Maybe this moment was a reminder that wealth was not meant to be hoarded but shared, that true richness came from touching lives, from connecting with people beyond the surface. Perhaps he couldn't fix his past, but he could choose differently for his future. And in that choice, he might just find a way to heal the loneliness that no fortune had ever cured.